I'm going to start with some trivia. And if you get the question right, you're going to get a little chocolate bunny. So, in the tradition of how we chase rabbits sometimes, you could get a little chocolate bunny today. We're going to be studying Hebrews 11 about Abraham today. First question's an easy one. Where did God ask Abraham to go? Mount Moriah. We have our first winner. Mount Moriah. Thank you. Now, the rest of the trivia is, what all other things happened at Mount Moriah in Genesis? Can you think of another? What else happened at Mount Moriah? God asked Abraham to go. If Greg was here, I would have to be holding him back, or he'd have all of these. I know he would. So I already had in mind to ask Greg to hold back and let some others get an answer. Can you think of another significant event that happened at the same place where Abraham sacrificed, or was going to sacrifice, Isaac?
David built an altar there.
We have a winner. Mount Moriah is the same place that David bought. Okay, I'm going to limit you to two. Someone else is going to have to get another answer here. So Robin's at her limit. That was in it's in Genesis, where David goes and buys the threshing floor from a man named I have to look at my notes. Arana. A man named Arana, when David bought, it's actually in 2 Samuel 24, verses 18 and 21. Arana, the Jebusite, David bought some property, a threshing floor, where he built an altar to the Lord. Same location. Mount Moriah. We come back here time and time again. There's something special about the place where Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac. There's a couple more. There's a big one. That's it. That's a promise. That's a promise, but what does that have to do with Mount Moriah? What else is called Mount Moriah?
That's where Jesus was crucified.
Close. Close, he was near there. You could see the spot from there. What happened at the threshing floor? What did that become when Solomon comes in the picture? The temple is built. The temple is built at Mount Moriah. We have another winner. Very good. Very good. So, what's special about this place? We keep coming back to this very same spot. Mountains are special in the Bible. Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, same place where the law is given. There are several things that happen on the mountains. But this particular spot, where Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac, later when David buys the threshing floor, later when Solomon builds the temple, same spot. Mount Moriah. What's there today? What is on the spot today? It's Jerusalem. What stands where the temple used to stand? The wall is near. The western wall is all that's left. The temple was destroyed. What got built on the Temple Mount? It's the Dome of the Rock. It is a Muslim mosque. That's a sore spot for the Jews, is it not? Now the Muslims have had that for 1,300 years. So in the year 600 or so, the Muslims took over that territory. They took over where the temple used to stand. And they hold claim to that property now. The only thing that's left is the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall. That's all that's left. And Jews pilgrim there, other people pilgrim there all year long to say a prayer and to stick a note in the stone along that wall. It's kind of a gathering place. That's all that's left. But that same spot where the temple was built, where the temple was destroyed, where the temple was rebuilt and destroyed again in 70 AD, that's Mount Moriah. It's also called Zion, Mount Zion. So when you hear about Mount Moriah or Mount Zion, it's talking about the Temple Mount. But it has its roots going all the way back to Father Abraham, which is where God asked Abraham to go and take Isaac for the testing, for the sacrifice. So, there may be one or two, and if Greg was here, I'm sure he'd have a rabbit or two right now. There may even be a future event that may take place at Mount Moriah. We don't know, depending on how you interpret Scripture. It could be that Christ may make an appearance there in his second coming. Just some trivia about Mount Moriah. I thought that would be a good way to start, and a good way for a few of us to get a little chocolate bunny. So, okay, now let's talk about Abraham. Turn to Hebrews 11. This is the text from our book that we look at today. As we think about the heroes of the faith, Abraham gets a lot of press. We didn't study this in our book, but Abel's mentioned first. Then we had Noah. We talked about Noah last week. It mentions Enoch, Abraham, and Abraham has most of the chapter. So we'll look at the faith of Abraham. Let's read Hebrews 11 verses 8 through, I think, 18. And that will tell us about the faith of Abraham. Hebrews 11 verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place where he would later receive his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him with the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations whose architect and builder was God. And by faith, Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky and as countless as the sands of the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They had not received the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of a country where they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to call them their God, to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Verses 17 and 18 will be our lesson today. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. So in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Think about what sort of faith you would have to have if you were Abraham facing this testing. God comes to Abraham and says, "Take your son and go to Mount Moriah. And when you get there, I want you to sacrifice your son to me." He packs up and he goes.
No questions.
He trusts God. He takes the wood. He takes fire. He takes a knife. He takes Isaac and some other folks along with him for the journey. When he gets there, he tells the guys that are with him, "Stay here. My son and I will come back to you when we're done." You can hear the faith already. He tells them, "Wait here, we're coming back." But he was so obedient that he built an altar. He laid the wood on the altar. He bound his son, Isaac, and he raised his hand with the knife to take his life. And it was at that point that God stopped his hand. And he said, "I know you would have obeyed me. You have passed the test. Look over in the bushes. There's a ram. Instead, offer the lamb, offer the ram." God provides the sacrifice. Moriah, Mount Moriah, also means God will provide. There's a verse, I believe it's Genesis 22:14. When you look at the text and you see it says Jehovah Jireh. If Greg were here, he would know what this means. What does Jehovah Jireh mean? Have you ever heard that? Have you heard Jehovah Jireh? Either in a song or maybe somewhere. Do you know what it means? It means the Lord will provide. Jehovah, Lord, Jireh. On this mountain, the Lord will provide. And that's Genesis 22, verses 14. That's the conversation that God has with Abraham. What kind of faith would we have to take it to the brink like that Abraham did? Abraham knew that Isaac was the son of promise. Way back in Genesis 12, when God first calls Abraham, he tells him, "You're going to have a son." He's already an old man. He's probably 75 years old at this point. Sarah is an old woman and barren. "You're going to have a son." "Really? Okay, Lord." But he had to wait 25 years for that promise to come to fruition. And in the meantime, they got tired of waiting. And Sarah come up with this idea, have a son by my handmaid Hagar. And that was Ishmael. But he was not the son of promise. Isaac was the son of promise. It's through Isaac that you will have descendants as numerous as the stars. And it's through Isaac that the line of Christ came, through the son of promise. Knowing that, and then God says, I want you to go sacrifice your one and only son. But Lord, you told me that it was through Isaac, the son of promise, that I was going to have all these children. Now, Abraham reckoned that God could raise the dead. If you want me to sacrifice my one and only son, I'll do that. But he reckoned or imagined that God would raise him back from the dead because it was the promise through Isaac you would have all these descendants. What kind of faith is that? To me, that's the example of ultimate faith and trust in God. Something in our book here, those of you that have been looking each week at the lessons, at least in the first three lessons, maybe more, there's a little equation in there. It's faith equals, this is on page 18 if you want to look real quick. Faith equals know plus trust plus move. Faith is knowing God, knowing His promises, trusting His promises in such a way that it causes us to move in whatever direction He's calling us. That's a great definition, I think, of faith as our book is exploring faith in these heroes of faith in chapter 11 of Hebrews. Faith is knowing God and trusting God, trusting in His promises, so that it causes us to move in the direction, whatever direction He's calling us to go. Something that impressed me when you look back at Abraham in the very beginning, in Genesis 12, when God first calls Abraham, and He makes a promise, He makes a covenant with him, that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. He promised him land. He promised him descendants. Then He said, go to a land that I'm going to show you. Where was that? Did Abraham know where he was going? Did he just pack up and go? He just packed up and went. Now, Abraham was probably a very wealthy man for his time. He probably had lots of other family, even though he didn't have personal descendants with Sarah at the time. He probably had a community that moved with him, servants. Obviously, he had sheep, goats, donkey, camels, a lot of livestock that he picked up and moved and went. And he headed off to the land of Canaan. And God promised him that land. And God promised his descendants that land. And Abraham trusted in those promises. Let's look for a second at, even though we've already kind of mentioned it, let's just go over it. What were the promises that God made to Abraham? We've already mentioned a couple. We mentioned land. We mentioned descendants. Can you think of something else that God promised Abraham and his people?
The whole world will be blessed through Jesus.
The whole world would be blessed through his descendants. What did He say about the people that bless you or the people that curse you?
Same promise.
I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. He had God's protection. He was going to take care of Abraham and make sure that he and his descendants survive. That he and his descendants would have that land, would have those blessings, would have those personal blessings of protection, would have those divine promises of protection. So many promises, not just one or two, not just land and descendants, but all of these other promises that he made Abraham, and Abraham trusted in those promises, and those are examples for us. We need to trust in God's promises today. Think about the promises of God, and think about trusting in all of those promises that he's given us. The other thing that has kind of framed Abraham's life is there were a series of altars that he built. Each time Abraham encountered God, he would build an altar and he would worship. These are just some of them. In Genesis 12, when God first calls Abraham builds an altar at Shechem in the plains of Moriah. This was the first altar after God appeared to Abraham and he promised the land to him and his offsprings. It represents an altar of thanksgiving. And I think what this is meant for us to see is the worship that Abraham was always involved in. The second altar was also in Genesis 12, just a few verses later, but a lot of time had passed, and he builds this one at Bethel, or Bethel, however you want to say that. After moving toward the hill country, where Abraham called on the name of the Lord, this is known as the altar of prayer, worship, and intimacy. Later in Genesis 13, this is an altar that he built at Hebron, at the oaks of Mamre. This was erected after Abraham separated from Lot, and Lot went his way, Abraham went his way, and settled in Hebron. This symbolized a place of continued communion and fellowship with God. One more altar, the altar at Moriah, Mount Moriah, where he was to sacrifice Isaac. This was the altar of provision and testing. And this is where we come to terms with the term Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. The Lord provided the sacrifice. Something else that I believe that we are meant to see in the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac is the parallel of God sacrificing his one and only son. You can't read about Abraham and Isaac without seeing God struggling with sacrificing Jesus. And just like God provided the ram, the substitute for Isaac, God provides the substitute sacrifice for us in Jesus. There is no way you can look at that story and not see that parallel. Yeah.
And he was justified in what he did by following and trusting in the Lord and following what the Lord said. I mean, even in James, there's a passage about, wasn't he justified with what he did with Isaac?
Mm-hmm. The other thing that we're meant to see is how not only does our worship part of this faith journey, but sacrifice is part of our faith journey. We have to trust God and His promises when He calls us to sacrifice. In the Old Testament, whenever they come to worship God, what did they bring with them? A sacrifice. What did that sacrifice need to be? Something of value, unblemished, like a lamb without spot. Or if you couldn't afford a lamb, then you could use 2 pigeons or something else. But how does the sacrifice come into play with worship?
It's a sign of obedience.
It is. Should it cost you something? Should the sacrifice cost you something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's got to be something that you value, that you're willing to give to the Lord.
Thinking back about the threshing floor. When David bought the threshing floor from Araunah the Jebusite, he was going to give him the property. What did David say? I will give no sacrifice to the Lord that cost me nothing. If it doesn't cost you anything, it's not a sacrifice. It might look like a sacrifice, but if it didn't hurt a little bit, it wasn't a sacrifice. When you think about our giving, if it doesn't hurt a little bit, is it really a sacrifice? Just something to think about. I thought about it. When I think about worship, when I think about sacrifice, when I think about faith, and when I think about what God's calling me to do, if it's not costing you something, is it really a sacrifice? That's right. So there is that element of I will give nothing, I will sacrifice nothing to the Lord that cost me nothing, like David said. And just thinking about how worship works into all of this equation of faith, how trusting in God's promises, how knowing God. We got to know God in order to trust God. So faith is knowing God, trusting God, but moving in the direction that He's calling us. And where He's calling you might be a different direction where He's calling me. And that's okay. What might cost you something might not be costly to me. It's about your heart. It's about what it cost you. Your reverence toward God. Your trusting toward God. Your wanting to know God more. Wanting to obey Him in such a way that you feel as though you're answering His call. It's going to look different for each one of us. Each one of us have different experiences. Each one of us have different talents. So what He might require of you may look very different than what He might require of me. But He wants us all to know Him and worship Him and trust Him and move in the direction that He's calling us to move. We got about 5 more minutes. What else struck you about this lesson, about Abraham and his faith journey? What would have been difficult, do you think, if you were in Abraham's shoes? All of it. But ultimately, the sacrifice, that was our lesson, was to look at how obedient Abraham was, even though God had asked him to sacrifice the son of promise.
I'm not so sure I would have
I don't know that I could have passed the test.
The whole concept of it is so difficult.
That's why he's our example. We may not have passed the test as well as Abraham did. But then he met God face to face. Maybe that played a little bit of difference in the faith. I don't know. I think about some of the older Bible characters that we talk about, and we hold them up as heroes of our faith. But they actually had physical encounters with God. That's not something that happens today.
The way he passed on that faith to his son.
He did.
His son asked him, you have the knife, you have the wood, and he said, God will provide sacrifice.
You know, something else that came to mind when I thought about Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice. Abraham was an old man. He was 75 when the promise was given. He was almost 100 when Isaac was born. And by this time, Isaac would have been probably a teenager. So Abraham would have been, let's say, 115. And Isaac would have been a strapping young 15-year-old. Could he not have overtaken the old man? I'm thinking he could. But I like the way you put that, Robin. There was an element of faith for Isaac as well as Abraham. Isaac let him bind him. Otherwise, I'm just going to take this knife away from this old man. Now, people did,
Walking up a mountain.
let alone walking up a mountain, an old man walking up a mountain. I ain't that old, but I get tired walking up a little hill. Still, when you think about, people did live longer back then. Maybe they were in better health for more years. But still, you think about an older man that Abraham would have been, a younger man that Isaac could have been. In my mind, Isaac probably could have overpowered Abraham and prevented it. He did not. Yeah, Oli.
Why did God need to challenge and check Abraham? I think he knew his heart. Why did he need to check him? I think he used the story to demonstrate to us how faithful he was. I think it must come for us.
I think you just answered your own question. And I agree with you. I think this was an example for us, an example of the ultimate test of faith that Abraham passed, that God allowed him to be tested to that point for our benefit. I agree. Yeah, Bruce?
Several things here that we take from this is life is not a resting place, it's a testing place. Abraham was tested through the flesh. We are tested sacrificially of loving not the world or things in the world, because that can deter us from God. Now, we can enjoy things in the world, but we have to know that God doesn't love those that live for the world. And we have to sacrifice that flesh part in order to have a spiritual life with God. Because we're trusting in Him through Jesus of what He's going to do for all mankind. Not just Abraham, but all the living faithful people.
Right.
And each one of us are tested. Each one of us sacrificed the world, the way I look at it, in terms of being able to trust God for the future, trust God for after the future, even in death, that the dead in Christ shall rise first. And that He will raise us from the dead.
That's right.
As Abraham believed, we've got to believe the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And as we were reading the earlier verses in Hebrews 11, Abraham was looking forward to a city with foundations whose architect and builder was God. It talked about they were strangers and foreigners in a foreign land. They were looking for something better. We're doing that today. This better not be all of it, because I'm not satisfied with this. This is too much conflict. This is too much turmoil. I'm looking for a better city. I'm looking for an eternal city. They were too. But the other thing that we're meant to see, Oli, is in these verses, all of these people died without seeing their promise come to pass. They lived by faith, hoping that it would be. Now, they'll get there. We'll all get there, but we don't always see it right here, right now. It may be a little farther down the road that you see it in this life, if you get to see it in this life. But for sure, we're going to see it in the next life, in the raising of our dead bodies, in the resurrection, the hope of resurrection.
A new body.
A new body.
Even Isaac saw it.
Even Isaac. And we're given glimpses of his faith as well. And in his descendants, all of the ones that we're going to continue to read about in the lessons to follow, these are all for our examples. We may not attain it, but we can strive for it, just like they did. My prayer is that we would all strive to have the faith that Abraham had, to trust God no matter what our lot is in life, no matter what the struggle is. And if God is testing us in some way, if we will hold to His promises, we will trust Him, then we will come out on the other side faithful. And in the meantime, we'll be moving in the direction that God calls us to move. Okay. That's all we got. Next week, we look at Joseph. That's a good one, too.